pick back up today for part 2 of my conversation with Stephen Young. In this episode, we begin at the point in Stephen's life where he has just been released from prison, and after exhausting all his options for a place to live, he finds himself homeless, living out of his car and on the streets of Nashville. We hear about what that looked like for him, what he endured, and the blessing of a man named Mike, who was instrumental in getting him off the streets. Stephen's story takes a turn that you just have to hear to believe, from being homeless himself to now helping the homeless each and every day. I can't wait for you to hear how this turns out. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Stephen Young. Can you talk about how you did go to the Nashville mission, which...
One time.
And I think, and I was going to ask you about this later, but I think a big misconception that a lot of people say is, well, people who are on the street are fine to be on the street. They could go to a mission. They could go to a shelter if they wanted to. But you said, what did you say? Oh, you said that you went one night, but it felt like another incarceration, and that the sounds were incessant and you were just a number again. Mm-hmm. There was also mandatory chapel service, which you said was a deal breaker.
Deal breaker for me.
So you went back to the streets.
I went back to the streets.
Have you heard that from a lot of people on the streets?
About the mission?
Or any shelter, yes. Like, do you think that's an attitude?
You have people on the streets that it could be 20 below zero. They're not going to the mission. And I wouldn't either.
Okay. Because of what, those reasons or other things?
Now, don't get me wrong. I have to explain there are two sides to the Nashville Rescue Mission.
Okay.
There is the program side, where if you want to go through the program, that's a very nice setup.
Okay.
And they do well.
Okay.
They do well. Then there is what they call the transitory side, where, like I did, I was just needing a place to get off and get a shower, a good night's sleep. That is what I term self-imposed incarceration. You have to take all your belongings and put them in a locker in an open courtyard. And if you don't have a lock to lock your locker, it's probably not going to be there the next morning.
Okay.
B, you have to go through metal detectors. You're patted down. And then you're crammed in there. It's bunk beds, and there's probably not 3-4 feet in between bunk beds. And they're in this big, huge room, and it's literally as loud as prison, and you get treated as such. You know, you don't get treated like a human being.
Humanly.
You know, and so I would never go back.
Yeah.
You know, but I learned to survive.
Yeah. You talked, which I thought was really interesting, about your time first at the beginning on the streets and just thinking, I hope I don't see someone I know.
And it was two things. A, I was having to deal with the fact that at the time, I still had a mother and 4 brothers alive in Nashville. And they couldn't tell you whether I was dead or alive because they didn't care. Now, I own my part of that. But my brothers, we were never close because it was like we all fought our own personal battles at home. And when we turned 18, we left. And we all went in different directions. Now, I have 2 left that I have a close relationship with. One, I don't even speak to the other one. But at the time, there was nobody there.
Did anyone ever drive by you that you knew?
They did. And one of them just happened to be an ex-wife, which was, oh my goodness.
Did you speak?
No, I saw the car and I took off. And she called me because I had the same cell phone number forever. Even after I got out of prison, I still had the same cell phone number. And she said, "Why did you run?" And I said, I don't want you to see me like this.
So what are you doing at that time to pay for food, because you still have your car at this time?
At that time, I did, but I didn't have it for long.
Okay, so what kind of things are you doing to pay for, whether it's gas, food, a phone?
I eventually said I've got to do something, and so I used to buy the Contributor.
Yes,
all the time.
Which, if people don't know what that is, I'm not sure if that's like a state program or a country program.
It's
just local.
But they have what is termed homeless papers in pretty much every major city in the country. And it was a paper here in Nashville that a homeless person could buy for 10 cents.
Yeah.
And then we could sell it for whatever we could get. So I remember buying a lot of those papers. And I thought, I got to do something. I got to eat. So I swallowed my pride and I went down and I went through their little training class.
Yeah.
And they gave me 10 papers to get started. And that started my career as a salesman of the Contributor.
Okay.
And that is literally how I supported myself from that day forward. But I can tell you that first couple of days was like so humiliating.
I wanted to read something you wrote and ask you if you feel like the majority of the homeless community would feel that way. You talked about being on the streets and how people looked at you. You said, in many ways, I was more vilified on the streets than I was in prison. I was now labeled. I was a beggar and a bum, an addict and an asshole. Jobless, useless, clueless, a nuisance. Poor and destitute, mooching off those with actual jobs, most likely mentally ill, probably with a criminal past. Do you think most people on the streets feel that way at one time or the other?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And how?
Because society makes you feel that way.
So do you think society is truly putting that label on them?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I one of the little quips that I use quite a bit, I get invited to speak to a lot of churches. I usually don't get invited back.
Why?
Because I tell them the truth, and they don't want to hear the truth.
Which is?
Well, it's not the government's job to take care of the homeless situation. If you're a Christian, it's our job. The Bible I read tells me it's my job.
Yeah.
We're to feed the hungry. We're to take care of the poor. We're to take care of the orphans. We're to take care of the homeless. It's right there.
Yeah.
It doesn't say give more money to the government so they can do it or expect the government to do it. We're expected to do it. We are called by God to do it. So that's A. Now, there was a time in my life you'd have never heard that come out of my mouth. But here's the thing. Nobody sat around and decided they're going to be homeless.
Right.
Something happened.
Yeah.
But the treatment I received, I was treated better in prison.
Yeah, you talk about people would sometimes throw like kind of their leftovers, toss it to you, or...
I had a guy walk up to me one time and he said, he had a drink in his hand. He said, "Are you thirsty?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, okay, here," and poured it over my head and left laughing. And this wasn't a kid. This wasn't a teenager. This was a grown man. Yeah. Had to be in his 40s easily.
Why?
I had a mother pull up one time with her 2 daughters in the back seat, probably 10, 11, 12 years old. And she rolls the windows down because it's summertime. And she goes, "Now look, if you don't start listening to your daddy and me, if you don't start doing better in school, yada, 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 you're going to end up like that worthless piece of trash right there." And the look on those girls' faces, just...
Do you have your own theory of why people, like why that woman would say that or why that man would dump his drink on your head?
Because it's easier to drive by him and not do anything about it. I tell people all the time, you want to change your mind about the homeless situation? Stop and talk to one of them. You know, I had a pastor. He pulled up one time. "Son, I've been preaching the gospel for 40 plus years. And I'm telling you right now, if you'll just give your life over to Jesus Christ, he'll take care of this situation for you.
Mm.
And I looked at him and I said, well, Pastor, I said, 2 things wrong. And I said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but there's 2 things about what you said that are wrong. I said, number 1, you've automatically taken it upon yourself to determine that I haven't done so.
Right.
I guess because I'm standing out here on the corner.
Yeah.
I said, the other thing is, could you please tell me what book, chapter, and verse in the Bible where it says he will do that?
Mm.
Because I'm going to tell you right now, Pastor, it doesn't exist.
Mm.
And he said, well, and he just pulled off.
Wow. Well, you did have, I don't know if you would call him your saving grace, your guardian angel, but I love this story because it truly is like kind of your redemption song almost.
It is.
You and again, you in your book were talking about these places, and I'm knowing exactly where you're talking about because I drive by them all the time. But you talk about the McDonald's and standing at the McDonald's in a neighborhood here in Nashville called Green Hills. And tell me about Mike Dodson, because we brought his name up a few times.
Okay.
Is it right that he's the other co-founder of Home Street Home? Okay.
Yes. I've got to take you from Green Hills. That was a different McDonald's.
Oh,
and
okay,
a different time,
okay.
But it was over on.
So where was he?
It was Nolensville Road and Bell Road.
Okay, I still know where that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's where I stood for almost 5. Well, I started in the Green Hills area, and then that's where I ran into my ex-wife. That's where I ran into everybody that knew me.
You left Green Hills.
So I left Green Hills. Nobody I used to hang out with was in that area of town. But I'm standing there one morning, and this guy comes walking up out of the McDonald's, and he says, hi. He said, I don't know if you've had breakfast yet or not, but I got you a sausage and biscuit. And he held it, and I took it. I said, thank you very much, and I turned my back on him.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I think, and this is because one of the reasons I really wanted to do this podcast was to kind of maybe ask the questions that some people don't want to ask, so they just won't do it regardless. Right. I think there are a lot of people who might go to a McDonald's and see someone standing outside and for an instant think, I could buy them breakfast. I would love to buy them breakfast, but I don't want to embarrass them. I don't want them to feel like that, or I don't want it to be awkward. When someone is standing outside a McDonald's, is the right thing to do 100% of the time buy them something to eat?
Yes.
Okay.
Always.
Okay.
Always.
Okay.
And I hear people say, well, I'm a little leery of them. I'm kind of afraid of them. I said, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
And they go, well, they could be, addicts and dangerous. And I go, you know what? I'm old school.
Right.
I'm 67 years old now. A lot of people lost a lot of money, by the way, that I made it past 30. But I tell people, if the Tennessean was still more than 3 pages, I'd still buy it. I'm a news junkie.
Yeah.
So I get up every morning and I turn the news on. And I hear about this robbery and this carjacking and this murder and this, that. You know what I never hear? The suspect is a homeless person. Never hear it.
Yeah.
Never hear it. Homeless people are more afraid of you than you are of them. Because I was.
Okay.
And that's why when Mike walked up to me that time, I took the sausage and biscuit and I said, thank you. And I turned back around to do what I was there to do.
Right.
And he stood there for a minute and then he just walked off. And another part of the reason I did that was, as again, I told you, I had built a wall that nobody was getting over or through because I had drinks thrown in my face, pennies thrown in my face, told I was trash, all of those things, standing on that very corner. But Mike kept coming back.
To just bring you food?
He would just, sometimes he'd bring me something to eat. Sometimes he didn't. He was there that morning because him and a group of other men, they had a Thursday morning Bible study in that McDonald's. They would meet before they all went to work, and they'd do a little Bible study. And he didn't mention that at first. but he kept coming. And it wasn't just on Thursdays.
Mm.
And I tell people, Mike Dotson, I hear people all the time, well, how do you help someone get
Mm-hmm.
up? I said, I'll give you a phone number.
Mm.
This is if people would just listen to Mike,
Yeah.
like I said, we wouldn't have this problem. But he will tell you that I was a hard nut to crack.
Mm. But he just kept trying.
He just kept coming, and he kept coming, and he kept coming. He invited me finally to come in to the Bible study, which I did. And he invited me to church one time and never brought it up again.
Did you go?
A year and a half later.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to him, I show up. And I tell people, do you know why? Because he only invited me one time.
So you were still living on the streets.
He kept coming back. And what I realized was, unlike it is with a lot of church people, it wasn't about getting me in church. That wasn't a prerequisite to him being there for me. He was there for me whether I went to church or not. And he proved that over that time. And it was that trip to church that started my road back to redemption. And he is totally responsible for that. He was the first person I ever told about what happened to me when I was 12 years old. Wow. I went from not even, he'd tell you it took him almost a year to get my last name.
Were you on the streets that whole year?
The whole time.
The whole time?
I was still on the streets when I went to church.
Okay. And then you said that he came to you one day and said, we would like to help get you off the streets.
He said, I think you're ready. And I went.
And he'd never said anything like that before?
No. And I tell people, I said, Mike didn't spend a whole lot of money on me.
Yeah.
It wasn't what he gave me financially. He invested the most important thing to a homeless person, his time.
His time.
And sometimes he'd just show up and sit down there. He'd show up with a pizza, and we'd sit down there on the curb together, and we'd eat pizza. Sometimes he'd take me to lunch.
Did he ever tell you, had he ever had a relationship with anyone on the streets before?
No. He said it was all of a sudden, it was just like he saw me, and for some reason, and he kept seeing me. I was there every week. And, he said he felt God leading him, and he said, and I finally said, okay, but, what do I do? How do I do it? And he realized I can't do a whole lot for a lot of people that are on the streets, but maybe I can do something for one. And maybe that was what God was telling him. Yeah. He said that maybe that was God was, and you were that one. Yeah. And he knew more about what I was ready for than I did.
Which I love that
took a couple of years to get there.
Which is what we were discussing. I think sometimes people think the homeless population, the homeless community is too big. I can't do anything to help. If I give them $10, it won't change anything. But if you just start with one person, and maybe it's a smile, maybe you don't have $100, or, maybe it's like you said, talking to them, having the conversation. Maybe you can help, and you don't know you have something.
Here's the thing. We have roughly, I would say today, 2,000 people that are living on the streets.
In Nashville?
In Nashville. Probably another 1,500 to 2,000 that are living in their cars. Now, you'll get different numbers other than the ones I gave you, but when people say, well, how many people in Nashville are homeless, I go, do you want my definition or do you want a lot of other organizations and the government's definition? Right. Because if you want the government's definition, here it is. Let's say a young lady is married. She's got 3 children. She gets a divorce. The only place she can go is home to her parents. The government considers her and those 3 kids homeless. If you got a roof over your head, you're not homeless, in my opinion. If you're not living on the streets or living in your car on the streets,
you're not homeless.
You don't fit my definition of homeless.
And let's insert here because I no doubt will get some people who say, stop using the word homeless.
I don't
That's
care.
not what we call them. And I asked you before, and will you share with me what you said about using the word or calling homeless people homeless
Well,
versus the
I'll never
other
forget
term,
the first time someone said, well, you used to be unhoused.
unhoused, which
And
is the politically correct
that's
term.
politically correct.
Okay.
And it's only been in that way for a few years now. And I looked at him dead on. I said, no, I was homeless, and don't ever insult me again. And I mean that.
Okay.
The fact that, and you hear it all the time, I hear it all, housing cures homelessness. No, it doesn't. I didn't become homeless because I lost a house. I became homeless because of what was done to me at 12 years of age, what was done to me at 16 years of age, what I ended up doing to myself for 40 plus years.
Right.
That's why I became homeless.
So tell me about Home Street Home, because that is your, would you call it your pride and joy, or?
It is of all, and let me say something else about Mike.
Yeah.
Before we go to that, because I try to give him all the dues he deserves. One of the, to show you the kind of man he was, and you mentioned that he came to me and said, I think you're ready to get off the streets. And he'd gone to his buddies in the Bible study group, and they'd all pitched in, and he gave me enough money to get off the streets, to pay my deposits, pay the first month's rent, do everything. And the very next day, he called and he said, so, did you get everything taken care of? And I lied to him. I said, well, I have a problem. And I said, I went to the laundromat to do all my laundry before I went to, move into my new place. And I went in to use the restroom, and I left my wallet sitting there by the basket, and somebody took it, which was a lie. What I did was I took that money and I went and gambled it all away, every penny of it. And he knew I was lying. He knew me at that time, but he didn't say nothing. He didn't say nothing. He waited, and a couple of days went by, and he showed up. I was still on my corner there, and he showed up, and he said, okay, now you want to tell me the truth? And I told him, and I said, because I was thinking, okay, he's done with me. And he said, it's okay. He said, this was a learning experience for both of us.
For both of us.
And he said, and all this is a new starting point. He said, I know you're not ready to handle that kind of financial responsibility. And so I've got to readjust. So he went back and paid those other men back the money that they had given and apologized for me. And then he took me and put me in my place. He, out of his own pocket, paid everything.
Wow.
And then that night took me to my first Gamblers Anonymous meeting and sat in the parking lot for 2 hours waiting for me to get done.
Do you think part of you still kind of went back to that place of when you all of a sudden had all this money and a place to live, of that, like you talk about that top of the mountain, it's too good, I'm ruining this. This will never work.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, and then we'll get on to the ministry part, because this is so very important for the public to hear. I got off the streets in March of 2014. I'm still not 100%.
In what way?
In a lot of ways. Let me tell you the first few months of off the streets and how it was for me. I totally expected it to all disappear overnight. Every time I got home and I put that key in the door, I totally expected it not to work. I never turned the bedspread down on my bed for 6 months. I took the sleeping bag that I'd been sleeping in and put it on top.
Wow.
And that's what I slept in. I didn't unpack.
Yeah.
Because if you've never had everything in the world taken away from you, or if you yourself lost it, and I mean everything, you cannot understand the fear of losing it again. And you want to know why some people stay on the streets? It's that fear. Wow. They would rather be on the streets than to take another chance and have it all happen over again. And that fear is crippling. Wow. And for the longest, I had so many people telling me what I needed to do and how I needed to do it now that I was off the streets, and the ministry and how this got started. And I had convinced myself finally that I didn't know what was best all the time for myself or anybody else. So I kept trying to please everybody.
Yeah.
I kept trying to do it their way. And it got to the point where it almost caused me to go back to the streets, to just wash my hands of everything. And I told Mike and I told everybody around me at the time, I said, look, here's what's going to happen. I said, I'm going home. I said, don't call, don't stop by, don't knock on my door. I don't know how long I'm going to be there. Could be a few days, could be a few weeks, it could be a few months. I said, leave me alone. Because what I had come to understand was nobody knew me better than me. And I needed to find out what I needed to do instead of having everybody tell me what I needed to do. And that was a profound lesson, not only for me, but it also carried over to what I do now. Because, and I was there, I'm going to tell you right now, I was there for almost 6 weeks. I never stepped out of my apartment for the whole time. I didn't take a phone call, nothing. But when I came out, here's what I told everybody. I love y'all. I appreciate y'all. I appreciate the advice. But it's got to stop. If you've got advice towards the ministry, fine. If you've got advice towards this or that, fine. But telling me what I need to do or how I need to do it to handle me, that stops now.
Yeah.
The only person I'm listening to is God and myself. And Mike.
Yeah, and Mike.
And Mike on occasion. But that was even hard for him to swallow.
Yeah.
But that was what freed me up.
You felt
finally.
it freeing.
That was kind of the last chain that was broken. And from that point on, that is how I've lived my life. And but when I started the ministry, I realized I wasn't the only one homeless that was being told what they needed to do. But nobody ever asked what they want to do.
Because they just think they know.
Well, no, they think they don't have the right anymore. You know, you've already proven you can't make good decisions or you wouldn't be homeless.
Yeah.
So you need to listen to us.
Kind of treated like a toddler.
Well, just, yeah. You are no longer capable. So you need to listen to us.
Yeah.
You know.
What does a day in Home Street Home? I'm sure your days are different, wildly different.
Yes.
I follow you on Instagram, and you do document a lot of the stuff you do and the needs that you have. And just from my perspective, it changes daily.
Hourly.
Okay. I mean, what are you out there doing?
Well, my wife will sit there and go, so.
And we should mention your wife does this with you. Back to Andy.
She has a full-time job herself, but she goes out with me on occasion, and she's fully supportive of everything. Okay. Matter of fact, when we reconnected, and I'll never forget, we were at Waffle House. We both love Waffle House, by the way.
Yes.
You know, yeah, go ahead.
No, I
Make
love
your
Waffle
jokes
House.
Here. I'm talking to your audience.
Okay.
I love Waffle House. And so I had, the thought had started rolling around in my head. Maybe. But I was terrified. And so we're sitting in Waffle House.
Mm-hmm.
And the waitress comes over, gets our drink order, and leaves. So I look at her and I go, so let's get married. And she said, what? And I said, will you marry me? And she goes, this is all she says. She goes, you're going to have to do better than Waffle House.
I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that.
So I said, that was perfect though.
Right.
That let me know.
She will say yes. Yeah.
That she will, because
that's awesome.
I didn't want to get a no.
Yeah.
I couldn't handle a no. So it was funny. It was a July 4th celebration that we used to do prior to COVID, and we'll go back to it eventually. On the 4th of July, we did this big celebration for the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
We went around Nashville in vans and picked them all up and brought them to this one spot.
Mm-hmm.
And we had music, and we did a cookout, hamburgers, hot dogs. We had a dunk tank. We did giveaways, everything. Because what I wanted to do was, and by the way, I had so many people tell me that it was just a waste of money. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to give them a day when everybody else was celebrating to also have that same opportunity to celebrate. And so I thought to myself, and it was spur of the moment. And I'm sitting there, and I'm in front, and the DJ's quit playing the music. I'm making a few announcements, and Andy's standing over to the side. And I sit there, and I go, I wonder if this is better than Waffle House. So that's when I proposed to her.
I think that would have been pretty good. And she said yes.
She did say
Spoiler
yes.
alert, yes.
Instantly. But so what is my day like? Andy asks me all the time, and her real name's Andrea. I call her Andy. She asks me all the time, well, what's tomorrow look like?
Yeah.
I go, I don't know.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll have, like today, I had this. I had sometimes, but a lot of times it's, I won't know till I wake up.
Okay. I mean, are you driving around? Do you have a specific plan? Are you getting phone calls of people?
We get phone calls daily.
Okay.
We get phone calls, we get texts, we get messages through
people
Instagram.
like in a crisis.
We get messages through Facebook. We get messages off of our website. Every day I'm hearing from somebody that's in need.
Okay.
Every single day. So I get up in the morning, and the first thing I'm doing is I'm checking messages that come in overnight if I don't answer. And a lot of times, like last night, I get a phone call at 2:00 in the morning. I answered that phone call.
Okay.
So because what I realize is if they're calling at 2:00 in the morning, it's probably not good. And in this case, it wasn't good. But I didn't have to get out of bed. All I needed to do was make a phone call. Okay. And I did, and it was taken care of. But every day is different, but every day is incredible. I am the luckiest person walking the face of the earth to we've all heard the old saying, do what you love and you never work a day in your life. Well, I'm here to tell you that is absolutely the gospel.
Yeah.
Because I don't work.
Yeah.
I started this ministry in October of 2014, just a few months after I got off the streets.
Yeah.
And that was, that took a lot of.
Did you feel like you were going back a little bit?
I fought it.
Yeah.
When Mike was the first one Mike said, well, hey, let's just go out and start doing some things.
Yeah.
Which I was cool with that.
Right.
Okay. And, but then he said, I think we need to make this a thing. And I said, what do you mean make it a thing?
Yeah.
He said, this is what you're called to do, Stephen. I said, have you lost your mind?
Yeah.
He said, no. He said, we need to form a nonprofit, and this is what you're called to do. I just know it is. I said, Mike, I am not going back to what I just left.
Yes.
I'm not.
Yeah.
That would be like, hey, you want to voluntarily go back to prison?
Yeah.
No. And I said, no. And he kept on, and he kept on, and he kept on. And finally, kind of like Eric with the book, I thought I had the fail-safe measure of being able to get out of it. And I looked at him and I said, okay. But if we do this, I can't be the face. I got to be Wizard of Oz. I got to be the man behind the curtain because, nobody's going to support a nonprofit run and founded by a guy who spent 8 years in prison because he committed 80-plus burglaries in 3 different states, an addict, 4 marriages, you name it, yada, yada, yada. And Mike said, it's got to be you.
Yeah.
He said, you lived it.
Yeah.
You lived it. It's got to be you. So I thought, okay, if we're going to do this, the only way I'm going to do this is I'm going to be totally and completely open and honest up front with everybody who crosses our path, because I don't want my past to come back a year after 2 years after we get this started to bite me in the rear end and we lose it. Thinking nobody in their right mind is going to cut me a check.
And?
Well, you know, when you tell God you got a plan, he just laughs.
Yeah.
Because, and here's the way it went down. Mike and I are out one day, and we had met at my office, which was the McDonald's, next to where I sold the paper. And we're sitting there, and okay, the first thing we have to do is we have to come up with a name. So we've each got our napkin, and we're writing names down. Well, I only wrote one.
Okay. What was it?
Home Sweet Home.
Oh, it was Home Sweet Home.
And it was a play off Home Sweet Home.
Yep.
But to me, that was my home. I felt more at home on the streets of Nashville than I did in the house I grew up in.
Wow.
So, and it stuck.
Yeah.
So we're still, now we're in the investigative stage. And starting a nonprofit is not cheap.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. You have to hire an attorney.
Okay.
You can try to do it on your own, but let me tell you, 9 times out of 10, it's just so. Yeah. So I'm contacting attorneys, and the best deal was $2,000. We didn't have $2,000. Yeah. You know, we're working out of our pockets. Right. But one day, Mike and I are out, and we've stopped and we've helped these guys that we find in a parking lot. And Mike is a real estate agent, and he had these magnetic signs that he had on his car, real estate agent. This lady drives by, and she sees us doing what we're doing, and she notices Mike's car and the sign. Well, she's good friends of the wife of Mike's boss. So she calls Stephen Dotson's wife and says, hey, I saw one of your husband's guys out with, you know, helping the homeless. Yeah. And so she tells her husband. So Stephen gets a hold of Mike and says, hey, my wife got this call and this, that, and the other. What's this all about? So Mike told him. And he said, let's have lunch. I want to meet this guy. So I told Mike, I said, yeah, what? Okay. So we go and meet, and I told him, like I told Mike up front, I said, let me tell you about me, because I don't want to waste your time or mine. And he said, okay, how much do you need? I said, $2,000. He said, okay, pulled his checkbook out and wrote me the check.
Wow.
And that's the way it was. Yeah. From day one.
Wow.
From day one.
Wow.
And over the years, Thomas Rhett, Taylor Lewan, Jason Aldean, the Florida Georgia Line boys, you name them.
People have come up to support you.
They've come. And every time I've met one of them, I've been honest and truthful and told them everything. And they go, how can we help? Yeah. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for being truthful.
How can the non-celebrity who maybe doesn't have extra money every month on a day-to-day basis, when we're driving around cars, when we're driving to work, or we're driving to drop our kids off at school, what are just even little things people can do in their own community to help one homeless person?
And I would suggest don't help more than one.
Okay.
Acknowledge they exist.
Yeah.
I'll never forget. It was kind of reverse. As I was standing on my corner one day, and this old beat-up pickup truck comes flying into the parking lot. And, you know, and there's a guy, and, you know, if they were going to put a picture next to the definition of redneck, he would have fit that definition. He had on the tank top T-shirt and tattooed up and ball cap and, scruffy beard and, and he's flying. And so I do what I did every time somebody passed me. I smiled and waved. And he slammed on his brakes and does a U-turn. He's headed right back for me. And I go, oh my gosh, I hope he realizes I was just waving. Right. And he whips around and he looks at me. He says, don't ever, ever stop smiling.
Oh.
And he said, I want you to know. He said, when I left the house this morning, it was one of the worst mornings I've experienced in a long, long time. And he said, I come here and I pull in and I look over at you and you're smiling and you're waving. And I'm telling myself instantly, are you kidding me?
Mm-hmm.
He's got nothing.
Right.
And all of a sudden I realized my problems aren't as bad as I thought they were.
What does it do to you?
He said, so know that you're making a difference in people's lives.
On the flip side, what did it do to you? What does it do to somebody who is standing on a corner, standing at the lights, looks at the car that pulls up, and the person, not even does anything bad, just simply ignores you? What does that do to you?
Well, it doesn't build your self-confidence.
Yeah.
But I could deal with the ignoring better than I could deal with the intentional actions of some.
Okay.
And like I said, the pouring of the drink over my head,
the
food thrown in my face, the guy handing me a pizza box. Here, you hungry? And he pulls off and I open it and there's nothing left but the crust. Dude, he'd already eaten it all. And laughing and things like that. But it was the people that you could tell were overly doing what they needed to do to ignore you.
Right.
Or to be ignored by you. And I can't tell you the number of times that a car with a woman would be pulling up and it'd be summertime and the next thing you know, the windows are going up, the purse is going between her legs and the door locks are engaging.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, I'm standing here doing this so I don't go back to prison.
Yeah.
Okay? But things like that.
Is the homeless problem, whatever you would call it, crisis, is it, I know you said about the government, but is it a fixable thing? Do you think it's
Sure it is.
a fixable thing?
Sure it is.
How? Because because one of my questions to you was, if you were head of the government, what's the fix? But you've just said to me, this is not a government thing.
It's not a government thing because the government will never do. I had a conversation with the governor's office. And it was a meeting that we were all involved in. And I sat there the entire hour and a half and I never said a word. And then at the end, towards the end, it was, Stephen, you haven't said anything. I said, no. Do you have nothing to say? And I said, oh, I've got plenty to say. You just don't want to hear it. Well, go ahead. And so I told him, this hasn't worked. It's not going to work. You can take it. You can put a new coat of paint on it. You can rename it. You can tweak this. You can tweak that. But it's still the same things that haven't worked. And he said, well, I guess you have a better idea. And I said, yes. And he said, well, give me a Cliff Notes version. I said, until we quit expecting them to meet us up here and we start being willing to meet them where they are on their level, get our hands dirty, excuse my crudeness, but be able to wipe the snot from their nose instead of just, then this isn't going to work.
Yeah.
They're not going to jump through these hoops. I said, it's like telling somebody they need to get good enough to go to church.
Yeah.
And here was the response. Well, that's probably not going to happen. And I said, I know. I've been in dozens of these meetings over the years. And you're still trying the same thing.
Yeah.
And we're sitting here now with a new homeless commission that's been established and is, been given $50 million.
Mm.
And I promise you, I was just in a meeting yesterday.
Yeah.
And they were talking about, how many they've gotten off the streets, but they would not answer the question I asked.
Which was?
How many of them are still off the streets?
Mm.
And they totally ignored the question because you will never get that answer.
Because they don't know it or they don't want to know it?
They know it.
Mm.
They don't want you to know it because I know what it is.
Right.
Within a year, almost 60% have gone back to the streets. Because they think putting a roof over their head and a bed under their rear end takes care of it all. And it doesn't. But they're all about the numbers.
Right.
See, they want to be able to sit there and tell the public, especially the government, they want to sit there and say, we got 265 homeless people off the streets in the last 6 months.
Right.
They will never tell you that a year later, at least half
are back. And I know your mission is more about helping people get their lives back together.
Well, and to survive.
Yeah.
I get accused of enabling,
Right, because you're buying tents or you're buying this kind of stuff. Right.
And my response to that is, if you mean I'm enabling them to stay alive, yes, I'm guilty of enabling. But here's the thing, and I made this comment in the meeting we were in the other day, not everybody's ready to get off the streets. I wasn't ready. I thought I was ready. But I explained to you how it was for me for the longest.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I had Mike.
Yeah.
I had somebody. A lot of these people don't have anybody. They'll have a caseworker.
Yeah.
But that caseworker, guess what? They've got to move on to the next person sooner or later. And I can tell you how it works. When they get them off the street for that first month, 6 weeks, that caseworker's there 2 or 3 times a week. And there's other people coming. Okay, we've got you some furniture. We've got you this. We've got you that. But eventually, they've got to move on to the next person because it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
I would rather get 20 off the streets in a year, and at the end of the next year, 18 of them are still off the streets, as to get 200 off the streets at the end of a year, 75 or 80 are still off the streets. The numbers, to me, don't work. But to the government,
they work. They look good on paper.
Yeah.
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 How can people support Home Street Home? Because I think it's so true what you're saying. And I do want to ask you this before I let you answer that. One of the things I'd brought up to you was I do think there's a lot of misconceptions people have. They're generalizations, sweeping. It makes me feel better if I assume this about the person on the street. So I'm going to read you a couple things and then just get your 2 cents.
Okay.
They could just get a job like the rest of us.
That, to me, is unbelievable.
Why?
That they could even say that.
Why?
Okay. I'm living in a tent. Let's say I want to work. Now, I'm not going to get the kind of jobs I had before, but I'm willing to work. So I'm just going to take what I can get. I'm going to go to work for McDonald's.
Yeah.
Now, McDonald's doesn't pay you enough to get off the street. I don't care if you work 50 hours a week at McDonald's, you can't get yourself off the street without help. And I'm talking financial help, not in the city of Nashville anymore.
Okay.
Doesn't happen. But B, when you're at McDonald's, you're dealing with the public. Even if you're in the kitchen on the, putting everything together, you still can be seen. What happens when it's the 5th day of work and you haven't been able to wash your uniform? You haven't been able to take a shower.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something's going to be said. And if you don't have the ability to fix it, you're just going to not show back up because you're embarrassed.
Yeah.
You've been embarrassed because it's you can't do it.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Plus, I'm going to be real honest with you. A lot of them get taken advantage of. I had a young man not too terribly long ago that was working at a fast food chain that I will not mention because I don't want you to get sued.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
You and me both.
But he called me and he said, Stephen, I don't know what to do. And I said, why? What's wrong? And he said, I'm on my 14th straight day of double shifts. And I said, do what? I said, why are you working so much? You don't have to do that. He said, no, they're making me. I said, they can't. Legally, they can't.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And here's what he was told. And this is why he called me. He finally told his boss, he said, he went in for his regular shift, and then he was told he needed to stay over, and he said, I can't. I've got to get some rest. I've got to just let me have one night of let me get a good night's sleep, and then I'll go back on the clock. And he said, if you don't, you're done.
Wow. And he doesn't feel like he has to report to anybody, right? Who's he going to tell?
Yeah. They get taken advantage of. When I was homeless, I had a guy pull up one time, and he said, hey, I've got this small construction company, about 5 of us, and we can always use an extra pair of hands. Would you like to do some work? It was summertime. And I said, sure. He said, I pay $10 an hour cash. I said, okay. Yeah, I'll work for that. Well, everything was great for a few weeks. And then one Friday I went to get paid, and I'd worked 60 hours. And he gave me an envelope. I opened it up. It's $400. I'm sitting there going, math doesn't work. Yeah. You know, I'm a pretty sharp cookie. And I said, hey, $10 an hour. I worked 60 hours. This is only $400. He said, yeah. I said, but I worked 60 hours. I said, I'm short. He said, no, you're not. He said, as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't have taken you 60 hours to do what you did. So.
And what are you going to do?
Yeah. He said, so there it is.
That's it.
And I said, well, if you don't make this right, I'm not coming back. He said, you think I care?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and it's just, and I've had people that pulled up to me and said, why don't you get a job? And I look at them and go, are you hiring?
Right. Yeah. Would you hire them?
Would you put in a good word for me to the person that is doing the hiring? Yeah. Because I want to work. Trust me.
Yeah.
I want to work.
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions for sure.
And here's the thing. Right now, I'm dealing with over 300 people that are working full-time jobs living in tents because they cannot afford to get off the streets off the streets.
Which is why when you fundraise for new tents that get blown away in the Nashville winter storm and people say you're just enabling, you are not enabling.
Not enabling.
You're helping them survive.
They have to survive. Here's what I tell people, and I get asked all the time, well, how many really want to get off the street? And I said, you talking today or are we talking tomorrow?
Right.
Because it changes every day. I said, today it might only be 20%.
Yeah.
I said, tomorrow it might be 60%.
Yeah.
And 90% of that 60% is the 20% that didn't want to yesterday.
Yeah. Changes.
It changes. And I said, the thing about it is we have to be ready when they are, not expect them to be ready when we are.
Yeah.
And I tell people all the time.
Just keep showing up.
One of my favorite stories is Wayne. Wayne's had been on the streets for 30 plus years, and everybody in this city had given up on him. Every organization, everybody. He's going to die on the streets. That's what they would all say. And I'll never forget the first time I met Wayne. I was driving down the road, and I saw him walking into a wooded area. And that's how I come across some of them. About 2 days a week, I just do nothing but drive the streets of Nashville looking for new friends. That's what I do. So I pull over, and I follow the little path. Well, I don't get within 50 yards of him, and he hears me coming through the woods, and he turns around, and he says, I don't know who you are, and I don't know what you want. Now, there were some very colorful words attached to those two phrases, but you just need to get out of here. I don't need nothing, don't want nothing. I said, he said, I don't care who you are. And I said, well, okay. I said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I said, here's my business card. I'm going to lay it right here on the ground. If you need something, call me. And I left.
Yeah.
And I went back. It's the Mike Dotson routine.
Right.
I went back, and I went back, and I went back, And I went back until finally one day he said, "You are either the dumbest," and I'll leave the rest out, or the most stubborn, and I'll leave the rest out. "You're not going to give up, are you?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, you might as well come on and sit down." And that started with Wayne and I.
Yeah.
A year later, a little over, I moved Wayne into his new apartment. That was 5 years ago, and he's still off the streets. And one of my proudest moments was when, now he was a cantankerous cuss, and I finally talked him into let me take him to get a haircut, his beard and everything else. He was scared to death, nervous. And but the ladies that I use, the barbershop I go to, they are super with our friends. They make them feel like they're royalty.
Okay.
And
do you want to give them a shout out?
Sure. It's Supercuts.
Okay.
Over in the what is that? I'm drawing a blank now. But over off Nolensville Road, over in that area, Concord, not Concord, but if you go down Old Hickory Boulevard.
Like the Nippers Corner kind of?
Nippers Corner, exactly. There we go.
Yep.
But super. And so we were, and I had to stand right with him the whole time.
To get a haircut.
It was like I was there with my child. And so we're walking across the parking lot. And he stops right in the middle of the parking lot. And he turns around with this look on his face and he goes, "Okay, what do you want?" And I went, What, Wayne? What are you talking about? "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" I said, "I don't want anything." "No, you want something. Nobody does this for nothing."
Right.
"So what do you want? Why are you doing this?" And I said, "It's simple." I said, "Because somebody did it for me."
I love that.
And it just unarmed him.
Yeah.
And so, but a little later, he's in his apartment, everything. He calls me one day. He says, "Can you come by?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I might be able to get by there this afternoon." He says, "Whenever." And I said, "Okay." And he hangs up. You got to understand, he's not much on hello, hi, how are you? Not a warm, fuzzy guy. And so I get over there that afternoon, I knock on the door, and he does what he always did when I showed up. He opens the door and he turns around and he walks back into the apartment. No hello, no come in, no nothing. He just opens the door and turns around and walks back. So, and I walk in, I close the door, and he walks into the kitchen. And I see him reach for something on the counter, and I come around the corner, and he said, "Here." And he held his hand out, and I put my hand out like that, and he drops a key in the palm of my hand. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "It's the key to my apartment." I said, "I don't need it." He said, "Yes, you do." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because if something happens to me, you're the only person I trust."
Oh, I love that.
You know,
Wow.
and that is what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I tell people, yes, we hand out tents. We average about 10 tons of food a year.
Wow.
What we do is not cheap.
Yeah. So
And
what's the best way?
We're the only ones that do it, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
What's the best way for someone to support you? Is it a financial donation? Is
Financial
it items?
always. And I tell people, and I'll have people that'll call me up and please, no offense, folks. They'll say, "I want to pick up a couple of tents." And I go, "Okay." I never say no, but here's what happens. They have the best intentions.
Yeah.
But they'll go to Walmart and they'll go, "Oh, a 2-person tent.
Right.
That's good enough for a 1-person person." And it's cheap. It's $20.
Right.
But it's not going to last through the first thunderstorm.
Okay.
And I can't lay down in it.
Yeah.
More or less, put all my worldly possessions next to me.
Okay.
Where I buy the tents, they're the largest 4-man tents made.
Okay.
And they're the sturdiest 4-man tent made. Plus, I have buying power.
Yeah.
That others don't.
Yeah.
I tell them, "You want to spend $50, let me have it. I can buy 2 of whatever you're going to buy 1 of."
Okay.
So yes,
Financial donations.
And let me tell you what, $10 changes lives. $10 changes lives.
Okay.
I used to try to the food drive route as far as our food, but here's what I ended up with: 300 cans of corn and 2 cans of chili. When we hand out our food, it's what we call meals in a can.
Yeah.
It's canned chili. It's ravioli type products. It's chunky soup.
Okay.
Not the condensed that you have to add water to, because water is precious to the homeless. Something that we know will fill them up.
Yeah.
Along with peanut butter and canned fruit and Vienna sausages and things they will actually eat that can also provide protein and nutrition and fill them up.
Okay.
And again, I can buy a ton of it for what you can, so those things help. And we never turn down anything, but
prefer,
I'm and nothing will bring the ugly side of Stephen Young out than to have someone say to me, well, if they're hungry enough, they'll eat it. Or, it may have a couple of stains on it and maybe a hole, but you know what? They're homeless.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I do not allow anyone to walk away from me after saying that without me giving them a probably not so nice piece of my mind. Because let me tell you about worthiness, folks, in my opinion. Worthiness was decided on a hill called Calvary over 2,000 years ago. When Jesus allowed himself to be put on that cross, he determined our worthiness. And I don't care if you're living in a mansion in Green Hills or Belle Meade or Brentwood, or you're living in a trailer park in Madison, or in a tent under a railroad track bridge. We are all, in God's eyes, worthy.
Yeah.
We do not have the right to determine someone's worthiness.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Our job, I say this, our job is not to determine somebody's worthiness or whether they deserve something. Our job is to help, heal, and provide for, and to love on. That's our job.
Yeah. Well, you are doing that. And we will put up the website, and we will put Home Street Home at Instagram is a great way to follow you guys.
Instagram
and all the links are there.
is probably the best.
Okay.
I was told several years ago that Facebook was for my age group.
Yes. Instagram is for the cool kids. Well, actually, I think it's TikTok and Snap. I think we're probably old on Instagram anyways.
And because when a certain group of people got a hold of me and they said, we see that you're on Instagram, but you don't post on there but every 2 or 3 weeks. And
people
I go, well, I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
And they go, that's your age, Steve. That's your age group. You want to reach us.
We'll send everyone over to your Instagram page. You do have a great Instagram page, and it's very heartwarming and
I try to do
informative, and all of the links are there for people to donate and help out.
But just remember, I want everybody to remember, a smile changes the world. Acknowledgement changes lives.
I love that.
It's just that simple.
Yeah.
And not only, I believe everything that I gear towards our friends on the street needs to be geared towards the world in general. I mean, if we look around us is what's going on. But smiles.
Well, I hope everybody who listens to this leaves this podcast and spends the next days of their days just smiling at people. If that's all they take away from this, I hope they take a little bit more, but if a smile is what they take away and it brightens someone else's day, then...
It's incredible. I don't get into a checkout line. I don't care if I'm at Walgreens, Walmart, Publix, Kroger. I don't care where I'm at. I look for a name tag. And I always address them when it's my turn. I go, well, Frank, how's your day going, buddy? It's amazing, the response. And you'll see them, they're like,
slump.
And then you go, well, Betty, how's your day going? Oh.
Just acknowledge them.
It's going pretty well. How are you, sir?
And it doesn't take more than 2 seconds.
Doesn't take. Because if we don't feel like anybody cares,
Yeah.
we find ourselves not caring about ourselves.
Mm. Yeah.
Self-love is some of the most difficult love to deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially if we've let the world tell us we aren't
Yeah.
deserving of it.
Yeah. Well, you have done a fantastic job of turning that self-love around.
Thank you.
And your story it really is amazing. And I hope everybody goes out and gets your book, and we'll put the link to that too, because it was truly amazing to read and inspirational.
They can get it off the website, and then the Change website, but also the ministry website.
Okay, perfect.
And,
well,
but thanks for having me.
Thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. I know I took a lot of your time today, but
that's okay.
There's too much to cover. I don't want to leave anything out. So I appreciate your time. I'll let you get back to, you're like the Robin Hood of the streets, doing the Lord's work out there in your truck.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stephen.
Uh-huh.
Thanks.